Man, growing up can be hard. Hormones are going crazy, making friends is a challenge, and of course, sneaking past clickers and killing cannibals in a post apocalyptic hellscape, am I right? Welcome to Lore Party, the podcast that explores the stories, characters, and universes of our favorite video games. My name is Leo.
And I'm Lawerence.
And today on the episode, we're exploring everything Ellie. I mean, if this was a game that was just Joel kind of going through this post-apocalyptic world, that would be like so many other games. I mean, I think part of what makes this game so special is the dynamic that Joel and Ellie have. So I think it's important that we all kind of take a moment and reflect on sort of her childhood and sort of the early years of the character that even personally I didn't know a lot about because I didn't read the comic book that Dark Horse Comic put out. What did you think of Ellie when you were playing through the game the first time?
Besides the fact that it was like kind of an Ellen Page ripoff.
You've heard about that controversy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Shouts out to Ellen Page. Come on our show and talk about it.
Yeah, she's awesome, and definitely Ellen. if you hear this, join us. We'd love to have you. We'd love to talk about everything. You're super cool. Also, really good in Umbrella Academy. So, shouts for that.
But yeah, no, my experience, my thoughts on Ellie when they first introduced her is like she was kind of like a snot-nosed, jerky kid. She's just like every typical teenager, super opinionated.
Shouts to our teenager listeners.
Right. I'm a grumpy old man. Come find me.
You'll win. We'll fight. You'll win, but I'll still be grumpy about it. So,
Exactly. I mean, she's like, typical teenager. So she's like mean and obnoxious and like has this overwhelming like, I can take care of myself. I don't need anyone to help me kind of like personality. But as you progress through the game, you start to see different sides of Ellie. And I like she begins to grow on you. I think like one of the first memorable times of like, that involved Ellie was when you guys get separated when you're in the hotel.
Oh, yeah.
And you're climbing up that ladder and that guy's like kicks you off and is going to drown you. And then Ellie just shoots him with the gun.
Oh,
and
crazy.
Like, it was like it's like, whoa, Ellie just killed somebody with a gun and she's a kid. Holy shit. But then the best like exchange between her and Joel happens when he just is like, whatever. And then she's like, no,
right.
I just saved
God.
you.
It was so real.
Yeah, and it was one of the first times where she like pushes back against Joel's shit because before she was like super
right.
passive and just like whatever, he's just an asshole, I don't care.
I also remember I was going to bring up that moment in my personal impressions of Ellie because like the moments after she pulls the trigger and then like rushes to, or like, and just that whole scene is so burned into my memory, not even specifically exactly what happens and who's standing where and like what they're wearing, but more like the emotional quality of it, which again, and I, as a voice actor, I'm biased in this, but like the thing that for me made that moment so real was Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, who voices Ellen Page. No, you did it. You ruined me.
Voices, I just got that.
No.
Oh, no.
Okay. And Ashley Johnson, who voices Ellie, it's just so visceral and it's so real. And I remember like looking at the game's character, like the game character's face. I remember looking at Ellie's face being like, is she okay? Like she just did this crazy thing. And she is. And immediately that scene pivots and it becomes this conversation about like Joel not kind of giving her any kind of credit and like not giving her any kind of trust.
Yeah, she wanted recognition not for taking a life, but for saving Joel's. And like there's something in there that kind of shows the difference between them, and we can get into that a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, she's just like, she grows on you because from my perspective, she is the like the one person in this game that is like kind of like the discoverer.
Yeah.
Like Ellie grew up in this like, cortisol or what cordyceps.
Brain
I'll just say
infection. Yeah.
yeah,
CBI. CBI.
she grew up in this CBI world with, this craziness where you either have infected people or you have, these people that are just living on the outsides of the remnants of society who are all about killing or eating you or whatever. This is her norm. Everybody else is just like, hey, remember when we didn't have to deal with this shit and life was normal, and like now we're just like hardened because we're just full on survivalists. And you have this girl who stops to appreciate the like basically destroyed ruins of society, or like some comic books that she finds in a house. Um, so it was crazy because it was like, who the hell are you? Like, you should be the most like kind of introverted person of anyone that I run into, but you're actually like fun and normal.
I think you're totally right, because we as gamers are entering this world having, just come from work, or we're entering into this world having just come from, again, normalcy, from what we normally experience. And for Ellie to say, wow, it's crazy that we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it's crazy that actress in that poster about that movie from before CBI is so thin, even though they all had money. And it's that perspective shift that is like so much grounds the reality that everything's changed, that the paradigm has changed, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk for a moment about kind of Ellie's childhood. And again, for me, this was, as I was researching for this episode, this was stuff that I didn't know about. Did you read the comic book American Dreams?
I did.
Nice. So they really know their stuff. So when I was looking at the panels and I was looking at the previews, I was like, wow, this really looks incredible. But it's a lot of stuff that I just didn't know. And I think for a lot of people, maybe some of the people listening, this knowledge from American Dreams is not common knowledge. American Dreams covers a chunk of time between when Ellie first arrives in Boston and when, and basically like a little bit later, some amount of time later, but not that
Yeah.
much time later, because I think it's only been about a year since that. Um, let's talk through some of this timeline, which again I didn't even know set in stone until now. So let's lay it down. So CBI started spreading in 2013, and we talked a lot about the timeline of the events of Last of Us in last episode, but it started spreading in 2013. Over 5 years later is when Ellie is born to her mother, Anna, and an unknown father. So we don't know who her dad is. Now, her mother dies shortly after childbirth, and basically Ellie spends most of her childhood being raised in like military run boarding schools within quarantine zones. So this is like the life she knows. This is her childhood, right? Her formative years.
Right.
We don't know a lot about that, but when she is shortly after she turns 13, she arrives in the Boston, Massachusetts quarantine zone. Shout out to Boston, where she eventually will meet Joel and Tess. But this is where basically this is the beginning of American Dreams. So I also thought, because we were talking about this before we started recording, there are some really strong parallels for those of us who have played Last of Us and some of the relationship elements that Ellie has with a soldier at the beginning of American Dreams, right?
Right. Like, because when she comes in to Boston and she sees someone at the gates who's they're testing them to see if they're infected. And then she kind of just brushes it off until they are like, okay, this guy's actually infected. And then they force him to his knees at gunpoint. And then it just like freaks her out. And then, you go to a scene where she's getting off the bus and a soldier approaches her and is just like, hey, don't get into any shit. Don't do your normal stuff.
Right.
So like we can see that, prior to this, she's built a brand of being rebellious and just like, just kind of hard to manage, which hard to manage is not good in a quarantine zone that's run by the military.
Yeah.
when they're really trying to keep people just focused on being in the moment. So it's like, don't get out here and do these things. So then like the soldier is like, well, I'm gonna leave. Like, or she unpacks her stuff, the soldier sees her again, and then he's like, I'm getting out of here. And then she's like, don't leave,
Right.
or take me with you. And then he's like, no, I have to tend to my own family. But like, it's one of the first times we see Ellie, who at the beginning of Last of Us, just the game is presented as this kind of bratty, walls up teenager.
Right. There's this sort of pattern that we see throughout Ellie's life where she finally lets her guard down and finally starts loving and caring about someone and trusting them to be there for her if and when she needs it. And then them being like, sorry, I have to leave for this valid reason, but something that she either like lacks the maturity to be like, yeah, no, that makes sense. You do you. Or she's just like so tired of it and so broken for that happening so often. Because we also don't know what are those past things that she's kind of known for, right? Like did she go from boarding school to boarding school and have this kind of experience over and over again because she was kind of up to no good? Or
Right.
is this kind of the first time really in her life as well? Either way, it's a big deal.
Yeah. And she shows a lot of, like, to me, Ellie shows a lot of signs of like trauma, like early childhood trauma. Like, I think she acts out instead of telling you how she feels about things. Like, we talk about like during her travels with Joel, I feel like the thing that keeps Ellie grounded and so like normal and so calm and so like, I don't know, she's like always in this like constant state of like, oh yeah, what's this? This is awesome, blah 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 blah, is because she's with Joel. I think that when Ellie is by herself, Ellie is very like, to herself and guarded.
Yeah.
On the timeline, like, after she meets the soldier and, he disappears or whatever, does his own thing, she kind of reverts back to this whole guarded Ellie. And she encounters this group of boys and they're gonna beat her up and take her stuff.
Why not? Quarantine zone. That's how it goes.
Right, exactly.
Welcome to Boston, as a Boston person might say.
This is just standard everyday Boston. So
that's how it normally is in Boston.
Yeah, getting beat up for your stuff. So this group of boys is gonna beat her up and take her stuff. And, in comes this girl who intimidates these boys and gets them to leave her alone. And she's just like, tries to kind of like give Ellie some advice about how to protect herself or like, what to do in this situation. And Ellie's just kind of like, these people weren't so tough. I could have handled myself. And then, it leads to Ellie getting like reprimanded by whatever person is running the school or whatever authority figure is around at the time. And they're like, hey, this is your, they're pretty much disciplining her. And they're like, you have a long rap sheet. So, again, they're going back to, Ellie having this issue with lashing out. And so then they like for punishment, they make her clean this car and it's like bloody from a battle. And there's like a finger on the steering wheel and it's like really gross. So while she's doing this, she goes to find her Walkman to listen to music to kind of just like escape the situation. And I think that's an interesting thing about Ellie that I want to get into a little bit later because she's got, this is the first time you see anybody with any sort of like electronic entertainment device.
But this is also, all of this is world building, right? Like we in 2019 are 6 years more advanced than we would have been if CBI had happened, right? Like if CBI had happened in 2013, Apple wouldn't be releasing new phones every year. Like we'd be stuck in this like whatever it was at that time. So the fact that
I got
Ellie,
my iPhone 5.
Yeah, right. Well, what I want to know is like, who did Ellie get the CD drive from, the CD player from? Because honestly, in 2013, CD players were still pretty few and far between So it's like, and I almost feel like it would be a sort of commodity, something that could be powered off batteries and not specific chargers. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it is kind of it's a subtle way that a child who was born in 2018, her primary like form of entertainment and the thing that she goes to escape the world is a CD player. Like, in a lot of ways we can talk about Ellie being this kind of old soul because she definitely seems in a lot of situations much older than being like a 14-year-old girl. Maybe that's one of the ways. She's just like, I don't know, I prefer CDs. It's like, okay.
Yeah, and when she goes, like, when she realizes that Riley took her CD, she goes to confront her, and pressures her until Riley's just like, whatever, you have shitty taste in music, I don't care. And it sparks kind of like an odd friendship between those two. Like, Ellie sees Riley escaping, and then she goes to follow her. And they have an interesting conversation at the beginning of their friendship, or beginning of whatever this thing that they're building between themselves is. Um, like, Riley asks Ellie about her future, which seems like not, it doesn't seem like a big deal. It's like, I'd ask, hey, like, Leo, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And you could give me an answer.
Right,
But
right.
asking someone about their future in a world where it's like, well, I'm stuck inside of a quarantine zone, the best thing that I can imagine is either joining the military or getting assigned a shitty job and barely having enough food rations to survive until this quarantine zone is toppled by civilians because of corruption, or we just run out of fucking food.
Yo, bro,
Um,
same. What are the chances?
like, probably gonna rebel or join the military. I'm gonna be on one side.
Sounds good.
Like,
Typical
oh,
Friday.
right, ultimate destruction either way. I'm gonna die. But like, Ellie's confused about that question. And she gives an answer, and Riley's response is like, "Yeah, that's the answer I'd expect that somebody would give in the quarantine zone." That's the definitely you're thinking the way the military wants you to think,
Yeah, interesting. Wow.
and tying it to them lecturing her about acting out, and then just her having like this CD player as her way to escape, the punishment and the chores that have been given to her. Like, it was a good answer, and I think it puts into perspective like the way Ellie acts now is not in line with the response that she gave. It's in line with more of like what Riley was saying. Like, hey, um, they want you to think this way. You shouldn't think this way. Like, you should actually put some thought into where you see yourself. Like, you shouldn't just fall into being a cog in this terrible, terrible machine that is the quarantine zone.
So American Dreams ends where they are kind of cornered by fireflies, right? And this is where Marlene recognizes Ellie as the girl that she was told to help by her friend Anna. And she's sort of
Yes.
like, oh my God, okay, we actually have to keep this girl safe, and then they threaten to shoot Riley if they don't, cooperate. And eventually they return to the quarantine zone together. All of this sets up the Left Behind DLC, which
Yes.
basically starts with Riley coming back from weeks away from camp. Basically, Riley returns and tells Ellie, I'm going to join the Fireflies, but I wanted to see you one last day. So, and this kind of comes after they're like, uh, Riley's like, come hang out with me at this mall that we used to hang out at all the time. And she's like, okay, I'll finally tell you that I'm leaving and this is my last day. So let's have a good time. And they're sad, but they like dance and play music. And this is also the first time. And for me, I'm glad I missed this DLC because the trailer that revealed that Ellie is a lesbian or bisexual was so cool and felt earned and felt justified and didn't feel cheap in any way. Was really well handled, basically. And to see that, having not known that in Left Behind, there's this moment where they're like dancing on a counter, right?
I think so, yeah.
Like I guess they to cheer Ellie up, I think Riley takes her Walkman and plugs it into a speaker system, and they're playing the music and kind of dancing. But this, um, oh, and then someone drops a pendant, and then there's a kiss, and it's before they really have a chance to sort out exactly what's happening. Because I think Ellie apologizes. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that."
And it's also like in that situation, it was because Ellie didn't want Riley to join the Fireflies and leave. Because Riley was like, I'm gonna get, hey, I joined the Fireflies, I'm gonna get assigned somewhere else. This was again just like the soldier before. She was like, don't go. Like, you're the one thing that I have. Don't abandon me. And then I think like, that's where we have this more emotional moment. Like Riley drops the pendant, and they end up kissing, and then there's like this like whirlwind of emotions, and because it's like this is a big moment, and I don't think that they really get to unpack or process this, because here come infected.
I mean, it's that age-old story of, like, the guy and the girl who kiss, or the boy and the boy who kiss, and the girl, and then mom and dad burst in, and they're like, "Hey, kiddos," and they're like, "Oh god, we do not have time to process what just happened." But in this case, parents are runners. It's all a metaphor, guys. The Last of Us is just about parents.
Aren't parents just clickers? They're isn't that just like parental instinct just bouncing off walls and then, ruining your good time?
I mean, some parents are bloaters, some parents are runners. Lots of shades of parenting. So that kiss ends up being really formative, and exactly, you're so right. This continues this pattern of like Ellie becoming vulnerable enough to say, I don't want you to leave. Like, I'm going to stand up for what I want. I don't want you to leave. And it not working, kind of. Because again, what ends up happening is they get chased, the runners that are drawn by the music chase them, and they both get bitten. And there's this like pivotal moment, because just imagine how different this world would be, where Ellie and Riley are talking about, do we commit suicide or do we enjoy the final hours of each other's company? And I think it's one of them decides, no, let's spend the last few hours we have together. And so brutally, so sadly, Ellie has to watch Riley change, because of course we all know, having played Last of Us, that Ellie is immune to CBI.
Yeah.
So like, God, what a way to find out, right?
Yeah. And it was Riley that was like, like, hey, let's sit and do this together. Like, if we, like, this is part of the processing of those feelings. It's like, now we have all the time in the world to be together.
Right.
And it's very it's almost like generically Romeo and Juliet.
Oh my God, so much, yeah.
Like, it's such a tragedy, because it's like, okay, now here's the one moment where Ellie gets what she's always wanted. Like, that connection, and it will last forever. They'll be together as infected forever.
Of course, Ellie doesn't get that.
Right.
It's really brutal. And then on top of all of it, so that happens, right? And it's brutal and it's terrible. Ellie returns to Boston, and then 2 weeks later, she meets this asshole named Joel. And suddenly, my early experiences of Ellie make so much sense, where I'm like, God, this fucking kid sucks. 2 weeks ago, she lost her like brand new love interest to the discovery of the thing that makes her life so valuable. But it's like also kind of her curse, right? It's that like maybe some part of her wanted to die with Riley, or didn't wanted to like transition in that sense with Riley and didn't get to.
Right. And it's like it's honestly, it's like a cruel tragedy, because like I said, here she was going to finally get that thing that she desired. And even going beyond like relationship or anything, it's like the human connection. Like, she didn't have anybody. The closest thing that she has to a family is the knife and the note that she got from Marlene. So it's like, here's this person that's been around now for a while, has no reason to leave really, but they're, joining the Fireflies, which, not knowing that you're immune to an infection doesn't, there's not much value. I can understand that Ellie doesn't put any value into the Fireflies, because like going through the game, I still didn't really put too much value into the Fireflies, even knowing what they were doing.
Right.
And then, it's just like, okay, fine, this happened, whatever, but it happened to both of us, and we're gonna go through this together. And then to see the one person that you care about turn, and from how Ellie describes it at the very end of Last of Us, she says that Riley died. So we don't know how, but Riley died after she turned. And if that, whether or not that was by Ellie's own hand or not, like, imagine that.
Right. Think about also for Ellie how this then mirrors later meeting Sam.
Yeah.
Not that she's like romantically engaged with Sam, but like this is like, oh, another person up here, someone who I like and that they like me back in being friends and all of this. And then watching them turn and like seeing them turn, going from one night being like, well, yeah, we'll talk about it in the morning, to in the morning that person's gone, and like having to deal with that reality.
And I would argue that those moments were just as impactful. Because I think we can all determine that at the end of The Last of Us, Ellie knew that Joel was bullshitting the hell out of her. And like, those were the examples that she gave. She was like, I need to know that we did everything because of like what happened with Riley and what happened with Sam and Henry. Like, that shit meant something to her. Because, Riley was infected protecting her. Sam was infected just trying to escape. And then Henry took his life because he had to put down his own brother. Like, God forbid you kill 100 people trying to protect Joel. Like, these were people who were genuinely good people that were just trying to survive. That like, Ellie feels like, she could have saved.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here, but stick around. We'll be right back.
We interrupt this podcast for a preview for a different podcast. I'm Bruce, a regular contributor to Lore Party. In the unforgiving world of the gods, there is an endless, vicious cycle of fathers killing sons, brothers killing brothers, and sons killing mothers. But Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, looks to end that cycle with his son Atreus, as they journey through the various realms of the Norse pantheon. Tune into our God of War episodes where my co-host Abu and I discuss the latest installment in the God of War series from 2018 and the insightful ways the game creates more depth in a beloved franchise. Just check out our Lore Party feed and search God of War. It should be easy to find. We now continue your regularly scheduled podcast.
So yeah, that's sort of Ellie as she's sort of going through the game, and definitely, as you pointed out, those final moments. She knows in the final moments in the game of The Last of Us, she knows Joel is totally full of shit, but she's asking a much bigger question than like what it might initially appear, because she's been on this whole journey. Now, that journey doesn't end, right? Like we've seen trailers, we've seen teasers. There is the new game coming out, and God, it looks so good. It just looks so good. And I don't know if it looks great because, because I trust the team behind it, or because I know that they're going to approach it with a lot of the same kind of sense of quality. But we can sort of start piecing together a little bit about who Ellie is in the years following The Last of Us from what we see in these sort of teasers and trailers. So let's go through some of these. We can talk a little bit about like what we see and what we think, and about that, and also kind of what that might mean for plot, because some of these things are both world building and also kind of game mechanic things, because we are going to be playing as Ellie for at least it looks like a majority of the game. So sort of the first thing I have noted down is you hear in this first gameplay trailer that you get to see her kind of moving around, you hear her referred to as the wolf or wolf. And man, if she had a reputation in Last of Us 1, she very clearly has a reputation now. And you were even talking about the initial teaser that had her covered in like blood with shaking hands playing the guitar on the bed. And Joel comes in and is like, "What are you doing, kid?" Just so aghast. Like clearly she's been through some shit, right?
Right. It's almost like they've like flipped roles. Like she has developed Joel's killer instinct, at a much younger age. Like now she's just kind of like killing without feeling. Because like yeah, like you said, like even just the shaky hands, she can steady them easily to play the guitar, and she was able to play the guitar around like a pile of dead bodies, and she had like killed people from the living room into the bathroom all the way up to the bedroom.
But this is interesting. It's true. It's like she really has sort of transcended. But this is in direct contrast to something that we see in the trailer that was played at E3 2018, which was this idea of like normalcy, right? Like we see footage of her at like a dance and she's older and looks more mature. She's closer to her 20s. And clearly she's, has some connection to some people around, some friends, some like relationships. She's flirting. There's a moment with the girl, this new girl, which for me was like, oh my God, just totally shocker. And actually, I think you can actually go back and listen. Abu and I recorded a Sony E3 recap last year. So feel free to listen to that old Jim, that old chestnut. But the idea of this normalcy. Now, this was an interview with one of the co-writers of the new game. She said the game is going to be this idea of like the normalcy that Ellie establishes a sense of self and this idea of like, I know who I am and I have this sort of life that I've built. And then there's some great trauma that like separates her from that. And we don't know what that is yet. But the rest of the game is about her dealing with that and kind of how that could push her to evolve and change.
Well, here's my speculation. I just feel I still stand by my point where she seems like a lot stronger, a lot more like
100%.
like
Yeah, totally.
she's grown into her presence. I also feel like she's dealing with trauma, and I don't think that the good thing about Last of Us is it's built out so well and the story is nice is that you don't have to like while we will have a larger event that dictates the direction of the game, you don't have to have one singular event where it's like, wow, this defines everything about Ellie because of all of the things that Ellie's gone through. Like trauma is something that you can bury at one part of your life and it pops up in another part of your life. And like you got to think about the things that happen in Last of Us, from like having to kill people, having to see your father figure is like mowing down people. You're kidnapped by a cannibal who went from like wanting you as his pet to like trying to kill you, and assault you and whatever. And all of these things, and we see early signs of Ellie like starting to maybe begin to process some of these things that have happened to her towards the end of Last of Us, like when they're almost to the hospital and she sees the deer and she pauses, and it's like I can understand that she pauses because it's a direct callback to the deer that she was hunting that led her to David in the events with the cannibals. And like that, like knowing people who have dealt with trauma in their lives, it's not something that that probably will rear its head immediately. Like you might be like you might have like an emotional response, but I think the real brunt of it, might pop up later in life, and you might not even know it's there. It just might be like, hey, why do you act a certain way or respond a certain way
Right.
to certain things that are going on? And that's what I love about this game. I think it's like what we're seeing now, and maybe like to a point how Ellie becomes more aggressive, or some of the things that we've already seen. And all of this stuff is just kind of layering on top of that existing trauma.
I've got one more thing to add, which is really just, you kind of mentioned it just now. There's this period of the game where Ellie is on her own because Joel is having this infection, and you have to kind of play as Ellie. And this is what leads to the meeting David and the cannibals. There is some period of time where Ellie is keeping Joel alive, like by herself, basically. And I can't help but see that as foreshadowing some eventual decision that she makes, like, I can make it on my own without Joel. She mentions in the trailer, it's mentioned this kind of old man out in Jackson, and one of the writers confirmed that is Joel. We don't know if he's going to like be a big part of the game, the second game or whatever, but clearly at some point, this isn't like Joel has died and Ellie is like mourning him in this new life. Clearly they split at some point. And I see that initial, like, because Joel was so injured that he couldn't go out with her and like hunt and stuff. This is like the thing that precedes maybe some eventual decision. So I think you don't have to guess as to whether we are excited or not about this upcoming game. It just looks so good. I mean, you, me, Ellen Page, and everybody. All together, just holding hands. So excited about this game.
This episode was not sponsored by Ellen Page.
Hashtag bring Ellen Page to Lore Party. It's a long hashtag, but that'll get people's attention.
Well, that about wraps it up. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please take a second to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us grow the show. Be sure to connect with us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again next time.